All right. So as people are joining, I'll add them back in. And I'm going to go ahead and get started. And I want to welcome everybody to this voting rights restoration training session. It's a two-part class, and it's really for some folks who've been doing VRR, it's more of a refresher just to try to bring us all back together. And also, there's been some lessons learned that we wanted to try to incorporate, and it gives people who've been doing VRR a chance to maybe ask questions that are about certain aspects that that maybe they've done things differently previously. We wanted to try to get standardized, but also we're intending this to be something that would also be helpful and useful for people who are doing VRR in your communities. When you go to your voter services committee meetings, or not committee meetings, I'm sorry, when you go to your voter services events and you're out in the field and you find someone that has says, I can't register to vote, it gives you the knowledge to be able to talk to them about the current status of the law, and also a little bit about the scripts that you might could use, because the more you do it, the easier it gets. And so you would be able to from the training that we're going to go through, you're going to, even the script for what we use for the texting campaign, this will give you some tools that you'll need to be able, when you go out and work voter drives, to be able to talk to people and be comfortable approaching people who say, well, I can't vote. That's one of the toughest things when I first started doing voter registration events. When somebody says that, it's just difficult sometimes to have that, be ready in your mind on what you're going to say, because part of it is trying to normalize the conversation. So this is really trying to be something for all of us. And as we go through this tonight, we're going to break it down into sections, and then, like, when Blair is going to give an introduction in just a minute for the overall voting rights restoration background and basically the history of how we got where we are today, we'll stop and let you ask questions. And then Becky, who has she has been amazing pulling all of these pieces together into a training program that is actually a two-part class. We're going to do tomorrow morning as well as what we're doing now. It's a two-part, and the whole session is going to cover several scenarios. She's going to stop at different points, and if you have questions and you want to just get them into the chat, then go ahead and put them in there, and I'll help her keep track of the questions. If you want to wait until she gets to that section, then you can ask your question, and we're going to have this recorded, so we'll, if we don't know the answer, then we'll go back and work on it. So that's, with that introduction, I wanted to, and I needed to also say, we have the League of Women Voters of Alabama has an agreement, a partnership with Campaign Legal Center, and Blair Bowie is our partner with the Campaign Legal Center on voting rights restoration. And we've been working with her now, I think at least a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, I think. And so it's been a fantastic partnership. And she is our, when we have questions, she's the person we go to. And she can help us with a lot of different areas. And Becky will be highlighting on that as well. But I'd like to hand it off to Blair. And she's joining us from Washington, D.C., I think now. Are you? And so I'll share my screen whenever, if you want to share your screen, then go ahead.
Great, thank you, Kathy. Yeah, we've been working with the League for about 3 years on rights restoration now. I think maybe even a little bit longer. I think we met in late 2017, Kathy. But yeah, I mean, it's been incredible to see how you all have picked this up and really run with it. And it's so exciting to see more and more League members getting involved every year. Really amazing work. And I think at this point, you're really comprising a lot of, if not the majority of, the rights restoration services that are available in Alabama. So this is just so great to see many familiar faces and some new ones as well. And yes, I'm coming to you live from DC, which is very sad for me because I've been on Dauphin Island for the last month and a half and I want to go back. So missing Alabama hard here. But yeah, so I'm going to share my screen, and Kathy asked me to just give a little bit of context today on how Alabama's law developed, basically how the law has become what it is today. I'm also going to give just a little bit of add a little bit more detail to what Kathy kind of was just talking about, explaining that some of the officials don't always know how the law works, and just to set some expectations for you all going into this work, working with officials who aren't necessarily well trained, as well as working with a particular population of directly impacted folks who you'll be helping. So yeah, just a little bit more background on who I am. I am with Campaign Legal Center, and I run the Restore Your Vote program there. Campaign Legal Center is a nonpartisan nonprofit, and we work on sort of all levels of U.S. democracy, campaign finance reform, voting rights, redistricting, and ethics reforms. And in terms of Restore Your Vote, we have a lot of different tools and campaigns going on. We have a website, restoreyourvote.org, that is a tool that allows people with felony convictions in any of the 50 states or Puerto Rico or DC to figure out if they can vote, and if not, what they need to do to get their rights restored. We've also, over the past 4 years, put organizers on the ground in various states. We ran a year-long campaign in Alabama called the Alabama Voting Rights Project in partnership with Southern Poverty Law Center, that helped over 2,500 people in Alabama get their rights restored, and trained another 2,500 activists around the state who are still doing this work. Kathy was one of them. And in addition to doing the rights restoration work on the ground, we track patterns in what's happening. What are the barriers that are keeping people who are eligible from exercising their right to vote? And then try to do advocacy and use our suite of litigation tools to dismantle those barriers where we find them. And so that's why, as part of this work, you'll be tracking and following up with the people that you're helping to make sure that officials are executing the law correctly. And if they're not, we'll put our heads together to figure out how we can fix that problem. So yeah, just some expectations going in. Know this, the law is intentionally confusing. It is designed to be confusing as a voter suppression mechanism. So don't feel bad if you get confused. It's meant to be that way. Similarly, administrators get the law wrong all the time. Again, you should know that going in. You're going to learn the law correctly tonight, and you're going to have a lot of resources available at your disposal to check to make sure that you are correct when you're telling someone that they can vote or what they need to do to get their rights restored. And you can feel confident that the information that you have is correct. And it's more likely, if there's a conflict with an administrator, that they are wrong because they're not trained. Also know that the people you're helping have been given the wrong information. A lot of folks have been told that they can't vote, even though that's not true. And I'll explain why that's the case. And you should know also that you don't have to memorize everything that you're learning tonight. You're going to have all these materials available to you. You're going to have Kathy, Brian, me available to talk you through any questions that come up as you're doing the work. In terms of working with folks with past convictions, I know members of the League of Women Voters are always respectful and recognize that everyone deserves dignity and respect. But some particular tips: you want to be welcoming and personable. You want to be patient. Sometimes it's hard for people to remember exactly what happened with their felony convictions. That's why we provide the League with Alicourt, so that you can look up people's records if they don't know exactly what happened. Going through the criminal legal system can be traumatic, and people have a hard time remembering what happened. Respect the privacy of the person you're assisting. Obviously, this is their own business, and you don't really need to know many of the details of their conviction beyond the exact questions that we need to ask to figure out if they can vote. And then the other thing that I'll just highlight is to make sure that you're thinking about the language that you're using when you're referring to other human beings. A lot of times you'll see the media referring to the populations of directly impacted people that we're helping as felons, cons, ex-cons. Try to use people first language rather than any of those words, which can be stigmatizing and kind of a scarlet letter. So I always say the phrase people with felony convictions. Some people prefer formerly incarcerated. Some people call it, say, people who are directly impacted by the criminal legal system. Default, go people first. And if not, just listen to how they refer to themselves. All right, so getting down into the history, it's important to be able to understand why so many people in Alabama are disenfranchised. You have to understand where Alabama's law came from. And the answer is that it came from the 1901 Constitution, Alabama's Jim Crow Constitution that was passed for Alabama to be able to re-enter the Union after the Civil War. The framers of this Constitution had to create a new document that would ostensibly conform with the Reconstruction Amendments after the Civil War, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Some of you all may be familiar with the documentary 13th, which does a really good job of explaining how the framers of these new Southern constitutions after the Civil War used basically a loophole in the 13th Amendment to utilize the criminal legal system to effectively put Black folks back into modern slavery. There is a really similar loophole in the 14th Amendment that has been used for the creation and the proliferation of felony disenfranchisement laws. So the framers of the 1901 Constitution were concerned, in their own words, with establishing white supremacy in the state within the limits imposed by the federal Constitution. And they found that felony disenfranchisement would be an expedient way of doing this because they were expanding the criminal legal system to specifically target Black people. And then if they had a law that goes hand in hand with that, that takes away the right to vote from those folks who are convicted of all of these new laws, like loitering or having a job without your former plantation master's permission, they could also strip them of the right to vote and disempower them. So that's where the law comes from. And at the time, the framers wanted to write this in a way that would be broad and discretionary so that the local registrars could have as much power and discretion as possible to apply it only to Black folks and avoid applying it to white folks who had felony convictions. So the phrase they used the phrase they chose to make that possible was that they said anyone who has been convicted of a crime of moral turpitude loses the right to vote. But they didn't say what a crime of moral turpitude is. So that determination was left up to the registrars, and they would basically make that decision based on the color of the skin of the person who was trying to register to vote. Fast forward 84 years, the issue of this language, crimes of moral turpitude, having been adopted specifically for the purpose of disenfranchising Black people, actually went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. And the United States Supreme Court says that racially discriminatory intent was the motivating factor in putting that phrase into the Alabama Constitution. So they actually struck it down. They said it was intentionally racially discriminatory. But in 1996, there was a constitutional amendment adopted by the voters of Alabama that put that phrase back into the Constitution. So up until 2017, there was no definition of crimes of moral turpitude. In 2003, the legislature did finally create a way for people who had been disenfranchised under that law to get their voting rights back through something called a certificate of eligibility to register to vote, which you're going to hear all about later. But that process was not publicized and really rarely used. Now, finally, in 2017, the state passed the Definition of Moral Turpitude Act, which says once and for all which felony convictions take away the right to vote. And the really important thing there is that it's not all felony convictions. It's a subset of about 40 convictions. And because this was so overdue, that definition applies both to people who were convicted of felonies before 2017 and after. It is just the definitive list. These are the crimes of moral turpitude. These are the only crimes for which you can be denied your right to vote. But again, the state said, well, we're not going to tell anyone that. So even though many estimates show that probably around 200,000 people got their rights restored when that law passed, most of those people still aren't voting because they don't know that they can vote, and they have been told in the past that they can't. No one from the state has ever told them otherwise. And that's why this work, what you guys are going to be doing, is so important, because so many people are just sitting out elections thinking that they can't vote when they actually can. So what does this look like today? So some estimates of felony disenfranchisement in Alabama reveal that a huge number of people in the state have felonies. Over 328,000 Alabamians have felony convictions. That's almost 9% of the voting age population. As I said, our estimates show that about 200,000 of those people don't have one of the crimes of moral turpitude, so they could be voting, but they are probably not, because they think that they can't vote. Now, of the people who have felonies, over half of them are Black. So nearly 16% of the Black voting age population is disenfranchised. This is not surprising now that you know that that's exactly how the law was intended to work. So about half of the people who are disenfranchised in the state are Black, but Black people only make up about a quarter of Alabama's population. So hugely disproportionate impact on the Black community. And I think I'm going to stop there, because you guys are going to cover everything else in the rest of the units. But this is sort of where we are today. And I wanted to pause and see if folks have any questions or thoughts about what I've just talked about.
Folks, if you want to, Larry, do you want to take it off screen share, and then I'll put it back to everybody. If you want to come off mute, we'll spend a few minutes talking. Any questions or observations?
Just I have a question.
Yes.
When you say that's the number of felony convictions in Alabama, is that state convictions, Alabama state convictions, or is that a total number for all kinds of felonies in any state or at federal, state?
That's a really good question. Those estimates are of people who have Alabama state convictions, I believe. And then the estimates that I gave you, which are that only about 130,000 people across the state have one of the crimes of moral turpitude, are also based on Alabama felonies. So that overall number is likely bigger.
I have a question. We have voted to amend the Alabama Constitution to take all the racist language out of that. And just recently, Kay Ivey finally gave the go-ahead to start working on that. And do you think taking that racist language out, is that going to help, maybe help people get their voting rights back?
That's a good question. I mean,
thank you.
Yeah, the problem, if you took the phrase crimes of moral turpitude out of the Constitution, the problem would be that would, by default, unless you take out the entire disenfranchisement scheme, that would mean that it goes back to the status quo where everyone with a felony conviction is disenfranchised. So that would not necessarily be better with regards to this discrete issue.
Okay.
But I think you could argue if they're going ahead and taking the racist language out, then they would just take out all felony disenfranchisement and be like Maine or Vermont, where nobody ever loses the right to vote.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things we're going to be watching carefully, because they did say during during the constitutional amendment, they were going to go do this, but they're just starting it at the end of this legislative session. So we've got to have people helping us look at what's happening in the legislative. It's the LSA, the Legislative Service Administration, that's doing this. So we'll be working with them, trying to understand what their plan is for it. Pamelia, did I say that right?
You did, thank you.
Okay.
You did, thank you so much. Really quickly, are the actual things that you're convicted of, do they have the correct legal language, like third degree, first degree, or whatever? And could that be placed on a card or fitted in a certain way so that you could pull it up on an app and see it? Is there plans for something that specific?
Yeah, great question. And those materials do exist. So yes, it only encompasses certain degrees. And Kathy and Becky are going to point you at a number of materials that show that, including a link that will pull up the list for you, a flyer, because it's too big to fit on a card, but a flyer, a one pager that has all of them. So you're going to have a lot of different tools that have that list and will help you correctly identify whether someone's been disqualified.
Yeah, we'll be, there's a thumb drive that we've got the network of people who are working the texting campaigns and working on this. I call them VRR warriors, but it's basically a group of folks, the league members who are working VRR. We have a thumb drive that has all this information. And what I'd like to do is to transition that onto a website that the state league VRR folks can all go to look at as reference. And we'll keep that up to date. I guess Cindy Lowry, you had a question. Did you want to ask it? Or do you want me to just read it?
It was just follow on to that first question of the federal versus state convictions. Does our Alabama Moral Turpitude Act apply to both federal and state convictions?
Federal and state convictions.
Mm-hmm.
This
is also
a lot of both to both.
Yeah, this is a very astute question as well. The list of crimes in the act are all Alabama state crimes, and then the very last clause says, or any crime which, if it had been committed in Alabama, would be a crime of moral turpitude. So it does cover federal and state convictions. The question of whether an assault in Florida is the same thing as an assault in Alabama is trickier than just looking at the name. And the problem is that the registrars will often just look at the names of the convictions and then compare it with the list and say, oh, I see theft of property. This says theft of property. It's disqualifying, but it's not. That's the wrong comparison. The comparison is whether the underlying act, actually the crime that they were convicted of, is equivalent to one of the crimes of moral turpitude. And for your all's purposes, that's a legal determination that I will help with. And you'll see that in the course of the presentation. If you find someone with an out-of-state or federal conviction, there's a number that I've already analyzed. And if it's not one of those, then I'll just analyze it and we'll figure out if it is or isn't. The registrars might still make a mistake, and often we can correct that with an advocacy letter that points out why they're wrong. If not, we've taken some of these as appeals up to court. And right now we have a case going on in Madison County where we're trying to establish a statewide standard for how that's supposed to be interpreted.
Thank you, everybody. And I think at this point, we'll just switch gears. And Becky, you want to start? We're about to jump into the actual training for the VRR process. And Becky, you share your screen. I think it should work just fine.
Let's see. So are you seeing the right thing, Kathy?
Go to the display settings. I think you'll have to swap.
Okay. There we go. Is that right?
Looks good.
Okay. Because voter rights restoration can be challenging in Alabama, as you have gathered from what you've heard already, we want to share some best practices for following up with people we're helping so that more people will actually get registered. With the support of the Campaign Legal Center, as you've heard, and Blair Bowie, the League of Women Voters of Alabama has continued its voter rights restoration project during the pandemic using texting software and a basic script that guides volunteers through the process. And Kathy, who is our state president, has been leading this effort for a while. The content for this presentation comes from league members who have had success following up with people they're helping. This has helped the league identify problems, as you've heard, with voter right restoration at the county level. And we suspect there are more issues that still need to be uncovered. In this two-part presentation, we will cover voter rights restoration basics and the tools. And we'll also go back and cover the basics of voter registration. We'll talk about how to use AlaCourt, which is Alabama's online court record system. We're in the next installment, which will be tomorrow morning, we'll talk about how to apply for a certificate of eligibility to register to vote. We will look at helping someone who has legal financial obligations that prevent them from registering to vote, and we'll look at other impediments to registration. We'll be making this presentation available to anyone who works on VRR online, and slides 3 and 4 contain hyperlinks to take you to different topics in the presentation. Although it hasn't been posted yet, when it's posted, we'll send a link to everyone who has participated in the training. And just to give you an idea of the hyperlinks, if you click on one of these topics, it will take you to the appropriate slide. Also, if you review this presentation online, be sure to choose a format that reveals the notes, because that's where most of the helpful information can be found. And the notes also contain links to online resources. The notes are searchable using PowerPoint's Find feature. Some of the slide text has been converted to images, so there are limits to the searchability of the slides themselves. As with in-person encounters, the starting point for an analysis is the list of disqualifying felonies taken from the 2017 law that Blair referred to. Both an alphabetized list and a list organized by statute numbers, referred to as cites in Alicourt, can be found in the Campaign Legal Center's Alabama Rights Restoration Manual, which we tend to call the Activist Manual, and you will find a link to that manual in the online version of this PowerPoint. As Blair mentioned, we also have to find out about federal and out-of-state convictions in case they match up with disqualifying Alabama felonies. Blair is available by email and text message to analyze these cases. Note that in Alabama, the only disqualifying drug conviction is trafficking, but a federal conviction for trafficking is not disqualifying because its elements don't dovetail with the Alabama law. And you'll find Blair's contact information in the online version of the show. We've been using ThroughText software to communicate with persons with felony convictions in a way that protects both their privacy and ours. And most of us access the software through our computers so that we can have multiple screens open. Most of our interactions in ThroughText have been text messages exchanged with the people we're assisting, but at times it's helpful to talk by phone, especially if you need information to fill out a voter registration form or applications for submission to the Alabama Board of Pardons and Paroles. And you can see there is a call option at the top of the screen there. If they try to call you, you'll get a voicemail that you can access from the ThroughText screen. If you click on a link to call, your own phone will ring. And once you say hello, the system will initiate a call to the person you're assisting. And the number that will show up on their phone will be the same number associated with your text messages. It is a good idea to give the person a heads up that you're about to call them, so they'll be more likely to answer. The Campaign Legal Center's text flow script, which is updated from time to time, is a good starting point. Following it closely will help you figure out if the person you're helping can register right away or needs to take additional steps. But going beyond the script will increase the chances that they will actually register. In addition to the script, we have additional resources to help us know what to say. The flowchart in blue is available in the Activist Manual, as are the lists of disqualifying felonies. The color-coded list used by the ACLU of Alabama is helpful conceptually because it divides convictions into serve-eligible convictions, in other words, ones that you can apply for a certificate for, pardonable convictions, totally ineligible convictions, and those that allow someone to vote right away. This list is available in the VRR kit that Kathy has mailed out, or you may receive it from Kathy in the future, and you can also find it online. However, the ACLU list is misleading in some respects. For example, third-degree assault is not even a felony, but the ACLU list shows all assault convictions as serve-eligible convictions. That's why it's better to complete your analysis using CLC materials provided in our activist manual. With the texting campaign, we've been inputting data directly into the statewide spreadsheet available in Google Drive. If you want your input to include even those who never respond to your initial through text message, make a note of their names and zip codes before you send your first message. Otherwise, the name may not reappear. This spreadsheet is updated with new data fields from time to time. The newest version allows you to insert dates to remind yourself to follow up on pending registrations or applications. Be sure to use the drop-down menu in the status column to indicate how you left things with the person that you've been helping. If you're given a last name during your conversation with that person, put that in the spreadsheet in column K. It's important for us to keep the information in columns I and J an exact match with the sign-up info, because those columns are linked to other spreadsheets. If you get a date of birth or address, find a place to note that as well. This information can be used to follow up on registration status on the Secretary of State's website. And if you haven't participated in the texting campaign before, what you normally receive is just the person's first name and their zip code, which you see in columns I and J. So we have just gone over the voter rights restoration basics and the tools. Does anyone have any questions at this point? And I guess I can't see very many people. So Kathy, is there a way for you to figure out if people are?
I'm looking, I've got the gallery view up.
Okay.
So one of the things I'd like to just throw out there is the reason we went back through this with everybody is because the team of folks who are doing the through text campaign, one of the things that several of our folks found this past year is that by maintaining the contact with the citizens who are needing their rights restored, we actually discovered several problems with the way the registrar was processing their registration, even after going through the entire analysis and telling them you're good to go register to vote. By maintaining that conversation with the citizen, we were able to find out that they were still turned down. And at that point, we worked with them to go back to the registrars. And I think we had close to about 5 examples during this past 12 months where, we actually ended up writing a letter to the registrar, and the citizens' rights, voting rights were provided. So this kind of shows you why this process is so critical. And it kind of closes the loop, because one of the things that, when you're just trying to help as many people as you can, that's wonderful. But if you can find, when you're doing rights restoration, by following it, by following through then and developing the relationship, even by text, several of our folks actually, I think they felt like, from conversations I had, they felt like they got to know the person that they were texting with. It's kind of surreal sometimes how you get to know somebody, even if you haven't really sat with them. And so it's a good thing. And wanted to encourage all of our VRR team to keep that kind of relationship. And that spreadsheet gives us a tool to do that with. And Brian, and I guess Robin just had a comment that was saying we did work with pardons and parole as well. And also sometimes, and part of the thing about the dates, the timestamp that Becky mentioned, sometimes we did find that the pardons and parole lost paperwork. And so it's just, we're kind of an advocate for the folks who are trying to get their rights back. So this this is all part of what we do. And not only are we helping the individuals, but I think part of what we're doing is actually maybe trying to force the system to get better, because every time we call out, the fact that somebody lost their paperwork or that a registrar didn't interpret the law correctly, then I think, and the fact that when we sent these letters, we also CC'd the Secretary of State's office, it kind of gives them a little bit of encouragement to do it better the next time. So,
Happy, I have a question.
yes, Cindy.
This may be coming out in the rest of the training, so apologies for if I'm getting ahead of myself. But so is all of this work right now happening through the text? So like if we're doing voter registration, if we're volunteering for voter registration in-person events, and we find someone who needs this help, do we then turn it over to the folks with the through text, or is there an in-person mechanism for this as well?
Well, each local league has people. Well, the intent was that each local league has somebody that has access to Alicourt, so that it takes some time to get proficient with Alicourt. What we want to do is to be able to have everybody that's going to these voter services events in person, that they understand the list that Becky's been going through, that you understand what the moral turpitude definition is, and also the fact that people can get a serve. If you want to do a serve application in person, you can. You'll have people who are trained that if you can get them to go with you to the events, then you can get it done in real time as far as starting the paperwork. But there's always the option, like if you go to a day reporting center, last fall we went there and there were like 30 or 35 people that came through needing help. And it really wasn't feasible for us to go through all the analysis in real time. So in that case, you can get a spreadsheet or start a list of people's names and phone numbers, like text, and then we can create a text campaign. So does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. So Becky, I think that may be all the questions on that.
Okay. We sort of zipped through the basics and the tools there, but that was just an introduction. Now what we're going to do is apply those to scenarios. So you'll be able to see these things again. Now we're going to review the basics of voter registration using a person who has a felony conviction. In this case, we're going to call this guy Mike. He actually knows what his conviction is exactly. So this will allow us to go through the process without diving into Alicourt just yet. Imagine that you've contacted Mike through text, and he tells you via text that his Alabama conviction was for drug possession and that he has no out-of-state or federal convictions. And you can see on the screen here, we're using the through text script, and we've gotten to the point where we realize that's his only conviction. So let me go back just a second. So drug possession was his conviction. If we look at the alphabetized list of disqualifying felonies, we see that there are 4 items that begin with the word possession, but none of them relates to drugs. So he has no disqualifying felonies. And it's important to remember this if you're handing this list to someone in the field who wants to get their voting rights back, because they might glance at this list and see possession, 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 and figure that they have a disqualifying felony. But if it relates to drugs, it is non-disqualifying. That means he can register without further ado. Now, there are several options for registering. If Mike has an Alabama driver's license or Alabama non-driver's ID card, he can register online right away. Working from the text flow script, you provide him with a link that will take him directly to Alabama's electronic voter registration application. And when we provide the link to someone we're assisting by text, we use a bit.ly URL to keep things short. Just clicking on the link should take Mike straight to the correct page on his smartphone. But if he's trying to retype the link into a computer or tablet, he needs to know to preserve capitalization or the link won't work. It's important to follow up to see if Mike was able to register online and if he got a confirmation number from the state, which will pop up when he completes his registration. The text we put in red above is not currently in the text flow script, but Mike is more likely to complete his registration if you encourage him to act now and you stay available during the process. So here you can see in red, we're encouraging him to go ahead and try it and say, we're standing by, you know, were you able to register? Did you get a confirmation number? And speaking of the text flow script, that is always a work in progress. And, you know, from time to time, there are improvements made to the script, and we would like to make some changes to the script to improve the follow-through opportunities. But it's just sort of a fact of life that you will rarely be able to stick to the script exactly. You know, conversations do tend to veer off. You should also let Mike know what to expect after he submits his registration, and then follow up in a couple of weeks to see if his registration was accepted by his county board of registrars. So he should expect a postcard. He can also check online, and you can offer to check online for him in a couple of weeks if he gives you his full name and date of birth. And encourage him to text you back if he has a problem. And here's an example where you've gone back weeks later and said, "Hi, Mike, this is Susan again with Restore Your Vote. Did you get your postcard?" Remember to update Mike's status on the spreadsheet, and there's a column to record his date of registration as well. Sometimes we share the shortened link with somebody and it doesn't work. If that's the case, ask them to download the Vote for Alabama app. One tab, as you can see on the right-hand side, is for registering to vote, and the other tab shows your voting location. If no election is currently scheduled, the voting location will not be listed, but the tab will show a voter status as active once the registration has been accepted by the Board of Registrars. If you're helping someone who prefers to type on a computer, direct them to alabamavotes.gov, and you might ask them if you can call to walk them through the process with a voice call. They should scroll down past any blue banners and click on voter registration. From there, they should click on online registration. Then they should read the requirements and scroll down and click on begin the application process. If online registration is not an option, there are several ways to help them complete a paper application. The simplest way is to mail them a foldable cardstock version of the application and go ahead and put a stamp on the back. Kathy has sent out supplies, applications, stamps, envelopes, etc. And if you've received those supplies and you run out, you can ask for more. Advise the person you're helping that although the paper application requests a photocopy of a photo ID, it's not required. If they do choose to include a copy of their ID, they should send the application in an envelope to the appropriate address on the back of the application. Make a note of their address in the database and be sure to follow up to see if they received the application. Again, try to stay in touch to see if the application is submitted and then accepted. This is the only way we have of knowing whether registrars are following the 2017 law. An even better way to help with a paper application is to complete a fillable PDF and mail it to the person you're helping. This reduces error because the registrar's office may have difficulty reading a handwritten application. Go to alabamavotes.gov and click on voter registration and then on fillable PDF. The form does have some glitches if you're using Safari or Chrome, so use Firefox if possible. Get the person you're helping on the phone and you'll be able to complete the application much faster. Mail them the application with sticky notes pointing out items they still need to complete. Their driver's license number or the last 4 digits of their social security number, plus their signature and the date. There's no need to print out the second page that includes the registrar addresses because you'll include a stamped envelope addressed to their board of registrars. Again, follow up to make sure they've received your mailing and follow up again to see if they're properly registered. And if you'd like more tips about voter registration, this Tennessee Valley video from the League of Women Voters is a great resource. And again, the link for that will be in the online version of the PowerPoint. So we have covered voter rights registration basics and tools. We've reviewed how to register someone to vote and the use of the felony disqualifying felonies list. Does anybody have any questions or comments at this point?
I see a question from Janine Norman, and she had a question about what if someone doesn't have a permanent address or a PO box, and you're talking about for voter registration. And that gets back to when you fill out the voter registration form, when you see the block that says, where do you live versus where do you receive your mail? Where you live, even if you're homeless, you can register to vote, but you do need to be able to get your voter card. Yeah, thank you for showing that. So you see that block where it says address, where you live, under addresses. That could be if they don't have a permanent address, or well, they need to be able to get their mail, but if they're homeless, for example, you can drop down to where it says map or diagram, and you can draw where they live. If there's somebody that lives under a bridge, or if they live in an emergency shelter, you can, put that drawing in there, and you can even write in the block of where they live. You could say they're homeless and they live at this shelter at this address. But the thing is, they need to have an address where they get their mail. And why that's important is if they don't get their voter card, then they won't know where to show up to vote, and they could be put on a inactive voter list. But that you might not, I don't know that you're going to see that as much with a VRR process, but when you're doing registration. So Janine, you asked in a van, not even in a proper RV park. They need to be a resident. So if are you thinking that they're permanently living in the RV park? Because if you sleep wherever you sleep, that's where you can register. So that's not exactly homeless, but yeah. Well, they would be homeless. They just would need to be able to put where they sleep and then put where they get their mail. And unfortunately, if they don't get their mail at a dependable spot, then they are going to have trouble getting the mail from the registrar, because right now this registrar only sends paper voter cards, and it doesn't mean they're not registered. It just means that they won't know where to go vote. And they could eventually get removed from the voter rolls if they don't ever go vote. So it is a catch-22. That is why it's really probably a good thing. Some of our folks on here, they've gotten pictures from folks who are so excited they got their voter card. I've actually gotten a text from one of the gentlemen that I helped who told me he went to go vote. He told me, so it is kind of nice when you establish a relationship to the point where maybe you just kind of check in and say, do you have any questions? Did you get your voter card? Just to make sure that they are not they don't get dropped off because they just don't know. And I also had a lady one time I was helping that was, she was in her 60s, and she was so scared. She called me on election day, said, I don't know what to do. And so, I met with her, and she talked to me about, she just wanted to know what to do when she showed up to the polls. And And I thought, it was just, it's really kind of, you don't realize what, how nervous people get when they don't know what they don't know, and they've never done it before. And if they're older, they just may need to have a little bit of help. If there's not any other questions, I think we'll just, Becky, you can
Okay.
keep going. Oh, wait, I see something. No, that's it. Yeah.
In our next scenario, we're actually going to dive into the use of aliquot. So if you have any coffee handy, you might want to take a sip.
Eyes are about to glaze over.
If you participate in this program, you will get a login and password that are unique to you. Please don't share them with others. However, it's a great idea to have a buddy system in place for when you have trouble finding what you're looking for. A fellow league member who has their own login credentials can sometimes spot something you overlook. And remember that aliquot is far from a perfect system because it relies on humans who input information. When you have somebody's first name and last name, in the through text, we say, would you like me to look up your conviction? And the answer is almost always yes. So they'll give you their last name at that point. And when you log in, you'll see this screen and you start with the party search. And when you're typing in the name, please remember to put the last name in first. I couldn't find somebody's conviction after trying multiple times because I kept putting in her first name first. And that's a rookie error that I'm sure I'll commit again. Do a statewide search, and you can see that's a choice there next to county, and narrow the division to criminal only to speed up your review. Usually limiting your search to the birth date provided to you is sufficient. However, someone with an older conviction may have the birth date missing from the record, and occasionally the wrong date is typed in. And I should have said the birth date is another piece of information that we usually ask for up front, although sometimes if you're trying to maybe establish rapport with somebody who's a little less comfortable, you might try and do a name search without asking for the private information of a birth date. I haven't had anybody object to giving it to me. Speaking of birth date, if the conviction is really old, it might not be an aliquot at all. Do your best to evaluate it with the information given you. The person you're assisting might have to go back to the court to find out more. Make it a practice to ask if they might have convictions under another name, as their name may have changed or they may have used an alias. Getting back to John, who's the person we're working with right now. Here are the results from a statewide search using his full name and date of birth and limiting the search to criminal cases. You can see the search criteria at the very top of the screen. If you look at the case number column, you'll see prefixes that indicate what kind of court heard the case. TR cases are in traffic court and you can completely disregard them. CC means circuit court, and those courts hear most felony cases. DC means district court. They hear misdemeanor cases and hold preliminary hearings in felony cases. If you want to sort by type of court, you can click on the case number heading and it will sort itself. Although district courts can't try felony cases, people occasionally plead guilty to disqualifying felonies in district court. Here's an example of such a case. This didn't come up in the search to assist John, but it's included here to show you why we have to look at every district court case when we're doing an aliquot search, even though it's unlikely to result in a conviction just in district court. This screen is also for a different individual other than John, but it's included to show why you can't rely on the original charge column on the summary page. Notice that it shows only one charge for each case number, and cases sometimes have multiple charges. The summary page for the case highlighted in yellow here shows only one charge, possession of a controlled substance, which is a non-disqualifying felony, we've already learned. But once you click on the case number, you find that the case includes 5 charges, and the last one is a disqualifying felony with a guilty plea. And that would appear on that list we looked at earlier. You would have missed that if you'd looked at only the original charge column on the summary page. So if you want to make sure you've done a thorough search, you must click on the case number for every single CC and DC criminal case. Now let's get back to John. The screenshot on the right shows what we see after we click on the first case number on his summary page. This is the case tab, and you can disregard most of the information on this page. Your next step is to click on the charges disposition tab, which is the third one over. Once you click on that tab, you want to focus on disposition charges at the bottom of the page, because filing charges are sometimes downgraded or dropped. There's only one charge here, breaking and entering a vehicle, and John pled guilty. We don't see breaking and entering a vehicle on the list of disqualifying felonies, but we might wonder if that's covered under first or second degree theft, which are disqualifying felonies. The way to be sure is to focus on the site or statute number highlighted in yellow. We get out our list of disqualifying felonies organized by statute, which you'll find in the activist manual. And we see that section 13A 811 doesn't appear on the list. Don't worry about leading zeros in Alicourt. 13A 008011 is the same as 13A 811. Whenever we're figuring out if a felony conviction is disqualifying, it's best to rely on the statute number or site rather than a description of the offense. Once you've finished analyzing a case, use your browser back button to get back to the list of cases so you can click on another one. Try to avoid doing the search from scratch to get to the screen, because we pay a fee for each search. Here we're looking at another breaking and entering a vehicle charge against John, again with a guilty plea. Again, the statute number doesn't appear on our list of disqualifying felonies, so we can disregard this conviction as well. Notice the pale green box that says related cases. If you click on the related case here, you'll find a probation revocation in connection with this case. Sometimes you can use the related cases box to find the circuit court case that relates to a district court hearing. However, the clerks are not consistent in using this feature. Let's go back and look at more of John's cases. If we click to see the detail on the 2 highlighted cases, we find a typical district court result for felony charges. The district court has held a preliminary hearing, and from there the case will be presented to a grand jury. So that's what bound over GJ means. Because first degree assault and third degree robbery are disqualifying felonies, we try to find the matching cases and outcomes in circuit court, and they don't appear among these 11 records. This is a case where we might try some different strategies to broaden our search. If we increase the records returned limit to 1,000 and do a statewide search with just John's name and no date of birth, we get 18 pages of records, which is overwhelming. In this case, we decide to search again, and now we are limiting our search to the county where the disqualifying felony charges were sent to the grand jury. And we'll hope to find those cases that we're looking for. When we limit the search to Mobile County, we find that there are additional cases with date of birth typos highlighted in orange that we know are John's, because the last 3 digits of the Social Security number are the same. We check out those additional cases and they're not disqualifying felonies. But the second page of the Mobile County search shows that checking the last 3 digits of the Social Security number isn't completely reliable for confirming you've got the right person. Based on date of birth, you can see that the first 6 cases here are John's, cases we already checked out during our first search. However, in 4 of these cases, the last 3 digits of the Social Security number don't match up with what we saw before for John. When we look at the corresponding case numbers, we realize that the clerk who input the record substituted part of the case number in the Social Security spot. This is another example of the potential for inaccuracies in the Aliquot system. Now, if you want to be extra thorough, you can go back to your 18-page search results and possibly pick up more relevant cases by looking at just the cases where no date of birth was entered. You can do this by clicking on the DOB header, which will sort the records by the first digit of the month of birth. The cases with blanks for that field will show up at the top of the first page. This happens most often with old cases or ancillary proceedings. Here, we click through these cases without a date of birth and find no cases that seem to be John's. Oops. In John's record, we've seen guilty pleas and cases bound over to a grand jury. These snippets that you're seeing right here from other defendants' cases show other possible results: convicted, acquitted, dismissed. Null pros also means the case has been dismissed, but as the last example illustrates, sometimes you have to look in a different spot to find that disposition. Getting back to John, after we click through all of his CC and DC case numbers, we have found he has no disqualifying felony convictions in Alabama. In addition, he's told us he has no out-of-state or federal felony convictions. This is great news for John. He can register to vote right away using one of the methods we've described above. Remember to update his status on the spreadsheet and follow up to see if he's been able to register to vote successfully. So now we've reviewed the basics and the tools, we reviewed voter registration, and we did a deep dive into the weeds of Aliquot. And if that became Greek to you, don't worry about it. You can access it again online, or it may make more sense to you after you run into those little weird things. And this is the end of the material that we had planned for this evening. Does anyone have any questions about the Aliquot slides?
Well, I guess I'm not seeing, let's see. Yeah, I see some comments, but I wanted to mention to everybody that, this is, using Aliquot is really kind of like the gold. That's the gold standard. But a lot of times when you're talking to people who need their rights restored, a lot of folks are not even, they don't have a disqualifying felony. They just don't know. They don't know what the law is. So part of what you're doing, and we're going to get this information to you, all these different documents that Becky showed with the activist manual and I like the color coded because it's just more visual for me. But it's like you have to get versed on how to take all these pieces of information, and when somebody talks to you, you know what to say. One thing I will say is getting used to using Aliquot. Once you've done it 2 or 3 times, it's a lot easier. And what she stepped through is really a great, she's gone through and basically given you a step-by-step process that once you get involved with doing Aliquot, it's not going to be that hard after you've done it a couple of times. And that's when she said buddy system, that's a great way to look at it, because sometimes just even doing it the first couple of times, it's, it is kind of intimidating, but it's not that hard once you've done it a couple of times. Just realize.
That was Harriet's contribution, by the way.
What's that?
That was Harriet's contribution recommending the buddy system.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, it's kind of like the saying, it takes a village, I guess. we've all heard that, and it is really helpful. And that's helpful on everything that the league does. We just need to be able to call on people and ask questions. And that's the thing also I like about this VRR team is that we can, we need to, if there's a question, then we can ask each other and try to, help each other learn and get better. But Becky, you did an amazing job. Thank you for pulling all this together.
And did you want to bring in any of the comments? I know there were no questions about Alicorp.
Let's see what comments we had. I'm looking.
There is one question.
Was that the one
Yeah,
from Roger?
I actually put a question in. Sorry, I'm the
Okay.
question.
All right. Let me go back.
It was basically just like, what if you mess up and you tell somebody they can register and they go through the whole process and somebody else catches your mess up?
I couldn't hear you, Cindy. You said it. What if?
What if you mess up and you miss something?
Well, this is where I'll answer that. And I think Blair may be online too. She can pipe up too, because when you're helping people, a lot of times what you're doing is you're helping them kind of like with their next steps. And you do a review of their situation, and you tell them that, based on what you've seen, if you think that they can register to vote, tell them that, that let's go ahead and do it. The registrar has told me, and I've heard Secretary of State Merrill say that they're not penalizing people for applying to register to vote if they've got a disqualifying felony, because the law did change. And so there's, they're even not, they don't know how to do the process that well either. So it doesn't hurt. It's just not ideal if you tell somebody to register to vote and they get turned down. But if you tell them that, if you give them a way to come back and contact you if they run into trouble, then at least you've got a way to help them if they get turned down, because sometimes they're going to get turned down even if they shouldn't have been. They just need to know how to get back with the league so that we can maybe help them figure out what happened. Blair, did you want to add anything to that? I think I'm not sure she's still on, but I saw her earlier. And I saw Roger had a question. It says, should we have someone who is familiar with Alicorp at all our voter drives? Roger, I'm not sure that's feasible. That's part of the problem is that sometimes you're at a voter drive where there's not Wi-Fi connection. And what you really want to do is to make sure you've got someone that understands the process. And that's why it's the more people you get familiar with the process, the better. If you can get their contact information and reach back to them, and either go back to one of your local league experts who knows Alicorp and the VRR process, or you can reach back to this network of people who know how to do rights restoration, then we can reach out to them after the event. But if you have Wi-Fi connection and you've got someone that knows how to do it, then they can, by all means, they can be there at your voter services events. But I would not go. I would not hold back from holding an event because you didn't have someone that knows rights restoration.
Okay.
You just need to know how to get help. It's kind of like when you go and when you know where to go from help, then you can, then you got options.
Okay, because we have one coming up on the 12th. And also make sure if we need to contact somebody to volunteer for that date.
Well, and one of the things you don't want to do is to give people the bad information. And some of this takes a little time to dig through. Now, you do want to be able to take some of these flyers that have information about what are disqualifying felonies. And you want to, like these little postcards and that we sent out, and we've sent those out to all the local leagues. And if a local league has run out of cards, then they need to just reach out back to us, because we've got funding that we can reprint cards that actually give contact information, so that if they want to reach out to get their rights restored by text, then we can help them. And there's also the Campaign Legal Center phone number is on that card too, so they can call them also if they don't want to do it by text.
Okay, thanks.
And then there was another question. Let's see. Janine, I'm looking at, let me go back up to the top. All right. At voter registration drives, we ask, do you need to update your voter registration information? Yeah, I mean, you've got to come up with ideas, and that's where it'd be nice to hear from others as far as ways that when you've gone out to the community to talk to your, to folks in your community, how do you approach them to make them feel comfortable? Because what you want to do is normalize this conversation. I've started thinking about this almost like a public health crisis. Used to be when you talked about breast cancer or prostate cancer, people didn't want to talk about it. And it's when you start talking about something, then it becomes more normal, and people don't feel stigmatized as much. We need to find some good techniques and good ideas on how to communicate with people to make them feel comfortable. I see Tiffany's question about our voter drives the only way. We used to hold voter rights restoration clinics up here in North Alabama, and we spent a lot of time going out and handing out hundreds of flyers, and then we'd set up for hours at a time, and we got maybe 10 or 11 people at one time at one of our best events. And that was when we basically went through the housing complex and found people who needed their rights restored or needed to get, assistance. Part of that is, you got to find a way that you can actually find people who need help, because a lot of folks are at work. If they're not there when you're there, it's like you missed them. And so you really need to find ways that you can connect. And I think Trinka, you went to a soup kitchen recently, didn't you? I think she was online earlier. Trinka, are you online still? I don't see her. But in Baldwin County, I think they went to.
Yes, we did.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right.
It's actually a food pantry.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna Janine, why don't you you ask your question, and then I'm gonna go back and talk about some of the ways you can approach people when you're talking to them. So,
well, that was going to be my point, that from National, they said, if you say, when people pass by our registration tables, do you want to register to vote, or are you registered to vote? People always say yes and keep going, because they're too embarrassed to admit, especially adults, that they have not yet registered. So we were taught to say, would you like to update your voter registration? And then we have our League of Women Voters banner, and they know that we know something about registration, and then they stop and they'll ask a few questions, and then they might admit, no, I've never registered, or I have a friend who's never registered. How do we do it? And then that's how we've also found some people, for example, when we set up at the libraries, that say, I have a friend who's been released from prison with a felony conviction. Can they get their rights restored? So we have had really good success with saying, do you want to update your voter registration information? Then no one's on the hook for not having registered. And they're more likely to stop and engage with us, and then we find out we can help them in a lot of ways.
Yes, that's a great suggestion. Thank you, Janine. It reminds me of when I used to do some work with our public radio. They used to say, when you ask people questions for like a community radio interview, you don't ask a question that they can just say no, or don't ask a question that only has a one-word answer. You want to engage, and one of the things it was also really helpful is to have something you can put in their hands. So even if they do keep walking, you've got something you put in their hands about voting rights restoration. One of the things that helps me is, if when I've gone and interacted with people at a voter drive, you start learning a little bit about the language when people are really uncomfortable telling you their voting situation. It might be better to kind of start with the fact that, hey, we're here with a voter drive today and we're registering voters. We've got a lot of services. We're here to register voters. We can help people, who need to update their voter registration. And we're here to do voting rights restoration. And sometimes they'll say, what's that? And then you talk to them. Or if you, if you start a conversation, some folks are a lot more comfortable, they'll just say, I can't vote. And you say, well, would you like me to help you figure out, options where you might be able to get registered to vote? And sometimes you even say, well, we also do voter rights restoration. It is good to be able to talk to people about the law, because if you can't, then sometimes it's kind of an awkward silence when they say, well, no, and then they walk off. But if you can have your brochure that talks about the fact that, the law has changed, now you can get your rights back, just by, if you're not on the list, you can register immediately. If you do have a disqualifying felony, if you served your time, you paid your, fines and fees, then we can get you registered. We can get you a application to get a serve. And it's kind of a spiel that you just kind of make it not, you're being respectful, but you also try not to, not be awkward either. It takes practice, I guess, is the main thing. And I guess I'd like to ask the folks on the line here who've done these things, what works for you? If you want to come off mute, this is sort of our final thing for tonight, and then we'll pick up tomorrow with the rest of Becky's presentation. I guess Harriet and Robin.
One of the things that works is if you invoke a friend, if you say, do you have a friend that needs their voting rights restored? Because I found online that people sometimes like to hide behind that. I want to know this for my friend.
Yeah.
And that gives you an avenue to provide the information.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Robin.
I like the idea.
Go ahead, Dana.
I like the idea of thinking of places where you could take our postcard and post it. Somebody's doing it at one of our local community colleges. I've mailed her a bunch and she's going to post them around. The registrar's office even said they would keep our postcard there if somebody came in to register and they had questions. I don't know how useful that will be, but I have had, I've forgotten, I think it was Trinka. I have a clipboard, and if I'm at a festival, I walk around and on the back of the clipboard, it says, do you need to update your registration? It doesn't ask, do you need to register? And that's been very helpful. Several people have stopped me who honestly did need to update it, just a address change, but it's just a good way to draw attention.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dana. Angela, did you have anything you wanted to add? As I know you've been on fire with the VRR there in your community.
Nothing in particular. I just think what the point that you're making is how you talk to people, and if you have a comfort level with the subject matter, I think it helps. It's really important the language you use and to not sound accusing, not use terms like calling people convicts. I mean, I just think that makes a huge difference. And also, some people that have some messy things on their criminal history, again, just don't go there. Don't go any further into it than you have to get the information you need, because there's always an awkwardness about that with several people who might have some sexual convictions or whatever. Just stay out of people's business as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask one more question? As far as going forward, now that the laws have changed, do probation officers or jails, prisons, or anything do anything to provide this information to people when they're going back out into society and maybe have this question in their mind or don't think to ask it?
Well, that's a really good question, Tiffany, because one of the things we found is it appears that maybe the parole officers are not being trained completely on the law, because of one of the things we saw up here in Huntsville last October is they told me when I first showed up that I wasn't going to find anybody here that could vote because they're all felons, and that was, and that really made me sad, because these are people who then went in and educated the people who were showing up for it was a day reporting center and a training center for people who were showing up to get advised on what their voting rights were, as well as a whole lot of other stuff. But they did not understand the law either. And then when we stood there at the day reporting center and talked to people walking in, they said, "I can't vote, I'm a felon." At that point, and that's also a really good place. I think that's probably a really good place to go to talk to people who are, they need the information. And if you're there with the information, and the more people you talk to, they're going to go talk to their friends. Part of the problem we're having in Alabama is that the leaders of Alabama, including the Secretary of State, are not out there educating the public about the changes to the law. And so not only are people who are coming out of prison, not necessarily, they may understand it, but they may not, but their families and their relatives, everyone needs to know about this, because it's, everybody may know somebody that needs to get their rights restored. And that's part of what the education component of this is, to actually get out there and talk to people who have nothing to do with getting their rights restored. They're just need to know, because if they don't know, then how is anything going to change?
Kathy, you need to tell them that nobody in the day reporting center was giving out the right information, and they finally asked you to come in. And
Well, that's true.
Yeah, I mean, nobody was giving them the right information.
Yeah, I got invited back to talk to them, and I talked to them, and all of them were listening. I thought that kind of tells you something, that's part of what the League of Women Voters mission needs to be, is to educate not only the people who need to get their rights restored, but the people who are actually talking to the folks who are coming out of prison.
Kathy, I had an interesting experience, and I'll be able to tell y'all more in a couple of weeks. But I called the Jefferson County Day Reporting Center, and the administrator I spoke with was delightful. She said, "Yes, you may come." She's asked me to come to her office next week so we can set up where. And I mentioned in my remarks that a lot of their clients most likely can vote. And she said, "You're right, they can."
Mm-hmm.
So it may depend on where, more to follow after we do this, but she's willing for us to come several times a month if we want.
Well, that's wonderful. And
yeah, I was very surprised.
This kind of points to me to some of the spotty education that's happening, across the state. Because I really do think there were people in Huntsville who knew the law as well. It's just the people who are being told to go stand in front and teach the class do not know.
Right.
But Barbara, you had your hand up. Did you?
Well, no, I was just going to point out, and y'all have already done this, that there's a network of day reporting centers all over the state. Mm-hmm. And I think Kathy has a list of the various ones.
I did,
but I'm not sure. People were asking about where you could, where would be a good place to do this. And the other place, I know in Mobile, there's an outfit that specializes in helping people re-enter into civilian life once they have been in prison. Ours is called the Neighbor Center, and it's a nonprofit group that helps people locate housing and jobs and provide some support to folks who are trying to get back into regular life after having served time in prison. There may be an institution like that where you are that would be open to having somebody come and just talk to folks about restoring their right to vote.
Yeah, each communities, you've got a network within your community that you more than likely, depending on what city you're in or area, you've got a lot of other groups that are working on similar type stuff. And Janine, I was going to say, I think some of these folks are getting the message. It's just not consistent, probably not consistent. But what Barbara was saying on, if you went in and found other groups that are out there doing voting rights restoration, one of the things I think the league has that a lot of groups don't have is access to Alicourt, because it's a very expensive software it's a database that's managed by a commercial contract for the state of Alabama. And we're very fortunate to have a grant that's paying for this. We cannot give passwords out to non-league members. And I don't necessarily think that not everybody needs to become an expert on Alicourt, but if you have somebody in your league, local league, that is an expert, maybe one or two, maybe more than one or two, but if you could just get a few people that know how to use Alicourt, that would help you out when you start doing voter services events. And if you don't have someone that knows Alicourt, then you still got access to this statewide network of people who know how to do VRR. So, so I guess the message is, even if you aren't an expert, you're one phone call away from being able to find someone that does. All right. So we're about to close it out. And Becky, I wanted to just thank you so much. This has been wonderful. And everybody, Becky built the presentation and pulled together all the different resources from a lot of our experts. And it's just wonderful. This is going to be a big resource for us. And I think, let's see, did we answer everybody's question? Was there something else? I think we answered everything. And so we'll start again.
Yeah, I just want to make one comment. I had a very interesting conversation today with somebody who is not affected with, who had no idea that there was any kind of law that actually defined moral turpitude. And I think letting general public know from time to time is a good idea as well, because you never know when they're going to be someplace and realize, oh yeah, that person can get registered to vote, and they know who to send them to. So
yeah, I think that's the thing. We want everybody to talk about this, because if you don't talk about it, people won't know. And also think about all the kids who get caught up thinking that I've committed a crime and they think their life is over. Then, if you could somehow make sure, instill some hope in people that they can get their voting rights back. There's a lot of options. Somehow you've got to keep people from just dropping out of from wanting to get engaged with what's happening in the country. But thank you guys. And this has been I really appreciate all of you showing up, and we'll talk again tomorrow. And Dana will be emceeing tomorrow. I'm going to get everything going, and then I'm going to step away because I've got to go to we got the Pomeroy marker being put out over in Decatur tomorrow. So, but Dana will be leading it, working with Becky, and Jean will be operating. This is where we all helping each other, but thank you, Jean and Dana. And then Becky's going to be doing the teaching. Have a great night.